Anno 1800 is a city building simulation game for PC, and obviously that means it requires a lot of building. But there is one thing that every city will always use abundantly of in order to even operate, and that's roads. I gave myself an utterly ridiculous and pointless challenge in order to just torture myself. So how big of a city can you actually build using only one road in Anno 1800? I began by creating my character. I went with the ex-con redneck looking guy and named him Del Dibidel. He is a wannabe NASCAR driver who only knows how to turn left, so he should be the right person in charge for designing the city. Dale arrives via boat to claim our first island, and he named it Talladega 1800. This is when I began to plan out the layout of the city for this challenge. Oh, and yeah, that's a random duo of Santas flying over this hellhole. Yeah, I don't know either. Anyways, since for this challenge I can only build one road, that means there can be no breaks or intersections anywhere. The tricky part will be getting to late game resources using the same road and not creating those intersections. This road will eventually have tons of buildings on it, making redirecting the road nearly impossible the further I progress. But since Dale is good at turning in one direction, I'm just going to put all my money in hopes that this concept will work out in the end. You would think convincing people to move to such a nightmare design of a city would be incredibly difficult. Short story long, it's really not. They just magically appear the minute you drop down a house. It's probably the smell of fish that attracted them. After I used up most of the initial stock of lumber the game provided, I enlisted new citizens for sweat labor inside the lumber mills. Children were included. I don't really discriminate. They produced lumber, which was used for more houses. Filling up houses and keeping them happy is the key to success in Anno 1800. Eventually, the settlement became a village with this process. I just worked slowly and methodically, expanding small bits at a time. It's very easy to overexpand and flip the economy upside down at a moment's notice. The next necessity for farmers is clothes which are made from wool. For wool, you need sheep, so I did what most people would probably do and built sheep farms. Unemployment was also increasing, and women needed something to do, so I just put down a sewing factory. Alright, I may go to hell for that one. Shortly after, clothes were produced thanks to that sewing factory, and then this slimy reporter who doesn't do his research tried publishing fake news. So I just tweet ran it at him, called him a bunch of names until he changed the headlines, just like Donald Trump had taught me. As my town grew, so did my inhabitants' neediness. There really is not a problem that alcohol doesn't solve, and why couldn't it solve this one? So I went ahead and made some for my city here. The chance of an uncontrollable city fire is also increased with drunk citizens, and that is statistically proven. Somewhere. Because of this fact, I built a fire station to prevent an overcooked city. At this point, it felt like my cash was basically being placed in a barrel, covered in nitroglycerin and lit. I mean, seriously, I was trying to conserve so much space, so I started ignoring a lot of things required to make the people actually happy, which in turn makes you more money. It was temporarily fixed by building more houses and ensuring all needs and a few extra amenities were provided, but the problem ended up being constant throughout this playthrough. Tax income is the best income in Anno 1800, or if you're the government. Eventually, Talladega 1800 did become an official village. Things were looking fairly smooth around this point, besides the fact that our economy was doing a romantic tango with bankruptcy. Increasing your population means additional clothes and fish are also needed, so those are always being added constantly, but only on an as-needed basis. And then, a fire did start in my city, despite my preventative efforts I talked about earlier. A lot of lives were lost due to that fire. I'm pretty sure everyone could have been saved, but this guy micromanaged his coworker so much while trying to start the fire engine that an entire avenue perished before they got to the fire. One eternity later, though, they finally put it out. At this point, more revenue was needed, or I was just going to send Del Dibidel behind the barn to be put down. Schnapps, which is an alcohol made from potato farms, was manufactured to help everyone cope with the loss of their homes from the fire. Afterwards, the citizens seemed to get over the fact that their houses were charred and gave me more tax money. I guess Del chose life over death. The extra money I just made was quickly used up in order to add houses yet again. Building out the city just became much tougher as extra pubs and marketplaces were constantly needed. Normally you can put these down more efficiently when building in squares, but since this is only one road, I have to put almost 2 to 3 times more than normal. This makes making a profit incredibly difficult. I'm also pretty dang bad at designing my city to make it look aesthetically nice. So that's why you see random trees and lines of fountains spread throughout my city. Talladega continued to grow bit by bit, but it still never really made much of a profit. I upgraded a few farmhouses to worker houses, and this attracts people with an IQ higher than their blood alcohol level and unlocks the age of industrialization. Entering this age of industrialization sounds good and all, but the workers end up having more needs in order to be happy. They're selfish pricks. Brick production is required in order to put down the next tier of buildings we just unlocked, so 2 brick factories later, a few workers to work them, and a dash of cancer from the toxic smoke, and the village eventually became a port town. Alongside expenses, the overall alcohol tolerance of the people seemed to increase, making them unhappy again. More alcohol was then created to course correct that issue. I also placed down a church to scam them out of money. Look, it's survival of the fittest, people, don't judge me. The fish aphrodisiac also was no longer cutting it for these bougie tighty-whitey workers. But pig shit and sausage on the other hand, that got them extremely happy. Sick bastards. Of course, something terrible had to eventually happen, always does to me. But, you know, it's always about perspective sometimes. What is the saying? When life gives you lemons, you make explosive potato factories? My entire alcohol production was halted from exploding potatoes. Luckily, I had enough of a stockpile to rebuild them and get the production back online. Otherwise, Dale would have had that coming to Jesus meeting behind the barn we talked about. The population finally began to grow again while also making a little bit of money, but to progress, I needed another food source called bread. Luckily, bread isn't hard to make. 2 wheat fields, 1 flour mill, and 2 bakeries to make bread was enough for the time being, but more will be needed later. However, wheat fields do end up taking more space than the fat guy you always get stuck sitting next to on airplanes. And the stench from the ginormous amount of pigs in order to make sausage apparently caused a citywide case of swamp ass, because now everyone's requesting soap. Soap factories need steel to be built. Steel is the first resource that is a bit difficult to make due to the many elements required. Iron and coal mines are combined to make bars, then those are used to make steel beams, all of which create a free cancer dispensary in the form of a toxic cloud above the city. All these new workshops for the steel line required nearly 1,000 workers and farmers. I went ahead and put in another residential expansion to accommodate all those factories. The space on the island became a thorn in my side, making me think more each time I had to put something down. But that didn't stop me. I kept constructing more and more houses to fill up factories I had to create, and every expansion in my population came with more consequences each time. The chain of goods becomes longer and more robust, and just requires more buildings in general to be built, and I've got a very limited space to work with. More brick and other resources located outside my originally planned dumpster fire of a city were also needed. So I needed to figure out how to get them. This proved to be a bit intricate in order to maintain the challenge and keep a singular road. While playing around and trying to come up with a solution, I had disconnected the road from the port on the shore and spent a lengthy amount of time trying to figure out a solution. When I made this disconnection, apparently it caused every person to be overcome with amnesia, and the citizens of Talladega forgot how to accomplish simple human tasks like walking to work or buying food. The city then entered into a financial crisis as a result of that amnesia. What I ended up doing to get access to the bricks to the north was by just looping the road around the outside of the island shore, then back toward the port on the inside, which still maintained a single road for the challenge. For the financial crisis, I just blackmailed a reporter, created propaganda, and was back in the green not long after. The soap factories were finally built, but naturally, they didn't have enough workers to operate them. But this time, it was actually caused by a shortage of clothes and not a lack of housing. I blame Del Dibadell's strippers. An extra sheep farm and sewing factory fixed the clothes shortage right up. The soap factories became operational, and the swamp-ass crisis of 1800 was finally eradicated. It then occurred to me though, how could a town with no education read my fake news I had just published? A school was promptly built to avoid any literacy issues. It also boosted happiness, but I don't really give a damn about their feelings. I have a job to do. After meeting all the needs of every factory worker and farm in town, I unlocked artisans. And if you don't know what that is, it's a fancy term for skilled worker or just lazy. You choose. This is when the single road challenge reached its hardest difficulty. Turns out, artisans are needier than my virtual ex-girlfriend who I never met in person. More factories to meet needs means less room for houses, which are needed in order to hit the city milestone. Packing all these buildings together like a clown car in order to save space meant that any disaster would have maximum area coverage, making it costly, very deadly, and satisfying. I don't really care about how many lives or buildings burn down. I just want to build as big of a city I can on a single road. A glass window production was added so that people could look outside to see the misery that surrounds them. And I guess a secondary benefit to having glass is being able to place the special buildings artisans can pretend to work at. Oh yeah, and this lunatic. He kept telling me about some promised land across the sea. I sent the ugliest people with him, along with very little rations. They won't make it, and will die a long death of starvation. But at least he shut up. After they left, I continued slowly expanding the residential area and adding to the various production lines only when I needed them. The citizens held riots from time to time, but I just looked at them as celebration of my good work.
Your people are rioting.
Every party needs a good host, so I hired guys with the largest egos, gave them a baton and a badge of authority. They went to the celebrations and hit the people like piñatas. All the police stations, fire stations, and markets that had to be placed due to the ingenious design of the city is what kept my profits so low. And still being stalked by bankruptcy, I just placed more housing wherever I could fit it to generate more revenue at this point. After the riots were over, the celebration of my dictatorship was over. Providing canned food to these creatures was next on my to-do list. Another farm of innocent animals to slaughter is the way of life in Anno, and cattle was needed for canned food. Cattle and pepper farms are put in kitchens to make the stew, which are then canned in canneries. Unfortunately, the canneries require artisans to operate. I promoted more farmers to workers, and more workers became those lazy artisans. At this point, it was just a vicious cycle. Place houses down, upgrade houses, watch the production and see what stockpiles start declining, then build a factory to fix that, rinse and repeat. With careful balancing, terrible planning, and an iron fist, we somehow did achieve a city status for Talladega 1800. But, if you know me at all, I couldn't just stop there. More lives had to be ruined. Oh, and by the way, miraculously, the expedition I sent out to die earlier somehow made it to the New World. Go figure. As the inner city buildings were upgraded, some buildings like the marketplace did become obsolete as they were only used by farmers and not needed at all by artisans. So I just obliterated their existence with the push of a button like a god. More explosive potatoes were added, more animals were slaughtered, and the continuous building of houses provided a steady supply of victims. Over time, the sanity level must have reached a new low because this guy was just literally watching his place burn down. Not only that, but he pulled out a paper and looked like he was trying to create a plan of how to deal with it. Like, dude, your house is burning. Maybe you should put some water on that. I don't know. Maybe he likes his family well done. Then there was a moment where I realized that I am more of an idiot than the guy trying to extinguish a fire with his mind. You see, in order for artisans to upgrade to engineers, which is the next tier in Anno 1800, they need fur coats. The only way to build fur coats is by getting resources from another island that is in the New World. So the only way to get that resource would require a new road on a new island, but that would break the rules I set for this challenge. Even though we already technically achieved the status of a city, I still wanted to push just a bit further. So while that depression that was created from this revelation seeped slowly into my veins, I thought about how to proceed. I'm just kidding. I said F it and I just made as many artisans I could possibly afford at that current moment. Afterwards, I provided these ungrateful plebs with hospitals to combat the second coming of swamp ass, which would inevitably be a problem from the additional animals required to feed them. I also slapped down a university named after myself to establish dominance and also boost my own ego. But I did hit a wall. I ran out of space and couldn't fit enough factories to produce the things I needed for more housing. At this point, the only thing I could really do was expand to another island, which as we said, breaks the rules and ends the challenge. All in all, I was able to build a fairly large city that was barely profitable, and it was actually kind of stable. So I'm pretty happy. I did complete the challenge that I set myself to do. Not only that, but we have a city where no one can get lost because there's only one road. And that makes me a genius through all this madness. If you had a laugh watching this or were entertained, be sure to leave a like before you leave. If you want to see more videos just like this one, make sure to subscribe and click the bell and you will never miss another one again. I will see all of you beautiful specimen in our next nightmare.